Followed that, as they say. That's a bit of a headline, isn't it? So, yeah, I'm Tony, and I think Peter's given you a good introduction to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. I do like to prefer to the camera. I know there's a camera on me, so I'll try and stay reasonably still. I've been asked to talk about all sorts of things, and I'm going to try and talk about all sorts of things, but I am going to talk a little bit about screening, because I think it's really important to highlight where we are at the moment. So, sliding past just a second. There you go. So we're off. This is some of the few of the things that I do. I'm a trustee, vice chair and finance director of Tackle. I am a Prostate Cancer UK fundraiser and an awareness speaker, prostate cancer research political campaign ambassador and supporter, and all the other things you see on there. I won't go through them all, but I do get involved in a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about one or two of them tonight. Backwards. That's better. And then a little bit about me. I've been a practicing accountant for 53 years. I've been married to my wonderful wife, Tracy, for 46 years. I've got two children, Matthew and Stevie. Matthew was named after Sir Matt Busby. Stevie was named after Stevie Coppell, as far as my wife is concerned. Stevie Nicks, as far as I'm concerned. And you can guess where the football connotation is. I was a Man United season ticket holder for 44 years. So, big football fans. If I'm in sophisticated company, Stevie was after Stevie Smith, the famous poetess. I've got 4 grandchildren. They are the apple of my eye. And I was awarded the British Empire Medal and the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2019 for my work in the community in Altrincham. And that was before I started doing any of this prostate cancer stuff. And those are my amazing grandchildren. Young Ethan, who is that one, helping me man an awareness stand. My step-granddaughter, Marnie, Finn, and Lumen, wearing her Man City top. So you can imagine how galling that was when they insisted on a photograph of me with her on Christmas Day, wearing her new Man City pyjamas. Didn't go down well. So my prostate cancer story, I'm going to do this quite briefly because I've got a lot to get through. In 2017, I'd done 19 marathons during my 50s. I'd done an ultra marathon called Comrade in South Africa. I was trained to do Comrade again. Comrade is 56 miles. It's 6,500 feet of climbing. It's in South Africa, so it's 30 degrees. And I started training in the January. In the February, I developed a groin strain on my right groin. This got progressively worse. So at the start of May, the race was in June. At the start of May, I went to see a sports injuries doctor. We had a pre-arranged MRI scan. He saw the scan and said, "We're not seeing what we expected to see. While you're here, have a blood test and a chest x-ray, and tomorrow I'll put you in for a full body CT scan." And then the day after the CT scan, he phoned me at 8 o'clock in the evening and said, "Really sorry to tell you, Tony, but I'm 99% certain it's prostate cancer." That wasn't on my mind. And I said, I've got an ultramarathon in 3 weeks. Does this mean I'm not doing it? He said, "No, you'll have started treatment by then." And the day I should have flown to South Africa was the day I met the oncologist for the first time. I went through another 10 days of tests. You've all been through it. Biopsies, bone scans, a lot. And my wife and I went to see the urologist for the first time, and he said, "Really sorry, it is prostate cancer." And then he used the word incurable for the first time. And then he went on to use the horrible words. "And I guess you want to know how long you've got to live." Like, really cheerful. And then he said, "I'm sorry, but worst case scenario is 2 to 3 years." And that was 9 years ago. I had a PSA of 129. I was Gleason 5+4. I had bone mets in every bone in my body from pelvis to skull. I'd had no symptoms whatsoever. And at the first appointment with the urologist, my wife said, "How long do you think Tony has had this cancer developing?" And he said, "Because it's spread so far, probably 10 years. If I'd known about my right to have a PSA blood test from age 50 and had one every year from 50 to 60, my cancer would probably have been diagnosed earlier when it was still curable. And that's what started me as a campaigner. Initially working for Prostate Cancer UK as an awareness speaker, and then becoming a patient advocate with building a reasonable reputation, talking at international conferences and so on. So I have become a campaigner. I am passionate about making sure as few men as possible end up like me, but that when men do end up like me, they get the best possible care, because I think we all know the care for some men is pretty awful. Just excuse me while I get my water. So that was my story. It's not a great one. My PSA fell from 129 to undetectable inside 6 months, and it's stayed there ever since, completely undetectable now for 8.5 years. So I'm very blessed, very lucky, and very privileged. Going the wrong way again. There you go. So the work of TACKLE, the National Federation of Prostate Cancer Support Groups. I joined as a trustee 3 years ago, as Peter has alluded to, and it took me a time to actually really understand what TACKLE was about. It's the National Federation of Prostate Cancer Support Groups, so we support groups. It's as simple as that. That's our main task, but at the end of the day, we are working with men living with prostate cancer, and so we developed this phrase, together we tackle, because that's what we do, together we tackle. The first 3 years I spent trying to define what the group is, what the charity actually is. It's a registered charity and a limited company. What we can actually do and what we can't do, define what limitations we have, and also establish much tighter financial control so that the trustees know exactly where they're up to. So support. We support groups. That's fundamentally what we do. We support men living with prostate cancer. We campaign. We do not have the wherewithal to be a campaigning organisation. So what we do as far as campaigning is concerned, we align ourselves with other charities and support their campaigns. And we've been actively involved in campaigns like Bins for Boys, but most recently we've been incredibly active with the screening committee. We've been encouraging all our members to actually respond to the National Screening Committee's consultation, and we know that hundreds of men did in fact respond to the consultation process, which is amazing. We raise awareness, but we don't do that as a charity. We do that through you, because every single person in this room raises awareness about prostate cancer. And what we do as a charity is we facilitate you doing what you need to do. So we are doing awareness work, we are supporting our members to do that, and all our trustees are actually out there doing exactly the same. We were very fortunate to get some funding from the National Lottery, £457,000, which is incredible, isn't it? But that was to actually develop new support groups up and down the country, but primarily in the West Midlands, North Yorkshire and the North East, where there were virtually no support groups, and too many men are being diagnosed too late and not getting support. So we are now developing more and more groups in those areas, and I'm going to show you the map of our groups in a minute. We've also been funded by Movember to develop a program, a buddy program. So men newly diagnosed with prostate cancer will be linked to a trained buddy, and that buddy will take them through the treatment decision pathway, will coach them about making the right decision for that person about what they're doing. That program's called Make Sense of It, and Movember are funding us for 3 years to the tune of £220,000. So it's a huge responsibility. We have to spend this money wisely, but actually even more importantly, when that lottery money and the Movember money runs out, we have to make sure we're completely self-sufficient. So we're doing amazing work with a very small group of people. Massive credit to Sarah Gray, who's our national programme lead. doing an amazing job with a very small team, as she says, a small but mighty team, supported by a group of amazing trustees. So this is, Danny's now going to do some magic and show you the tackle map, I hope. So you can see the blue groups, you're the blue, one of the blue groups over here somewhere, but all the red groups are the new groups. So we've got loads up here, and we've got a few here and a few there. And so we are already have developed something like 20 new groups, and there's a lot in the pipeline. So we are doing some amazing work at making sure men up and down the country get properly supported. Thank you. So how did I become a patient advocate? And this is where it all started. So MOTR stands for Maggie's on the Runway. And the Maggie's Centre in Manchester, where I used to go for support when I was first diagnosed. I was falling apart. I didn't know what on earth was happening in life, and I went to the Maggie's Centre and was very, very well supported. And I used to go to the Maggie's Centre on a regular basis while I was waiting for treatment at the Christie, which is about 400 yards away. And a lady bumped into me one day and she said, "You're going to be great in the fashion show." What? A fashion show? So she said, "Yeah, you'll be great in the fashion show." So anyway, I got roped into doing this flipping fashion show. That's the aviation viewing park at Manchester Airport, and that is actually underneath the fuselage of Concorde. And I was one of 8 catwalk teams that day. The audience was 800 people, including Rick Astley, who actually then in the evening for the gala ball, his band did a full band set as the disco for the night. So you can imagine how amazing that was. And then Margot said, "And whilst you're at it, I'd like you to do a speech." So I come walking down the fuselage of Concorde, feeling very nervous, looking at these 800 people. And I start my speech, and because I in those days I had to read it because it was too emotional. And I started my speech. I got about halfway through. I looked down, and Rick Astley's on the front row in floods of tears. So my claim to fame is I made Rick Astley cry, and he's never let me down. So that's where it all started. And then this woman was Margot Cornish, now MBE, because that fashion show raised £220,000 for Maggie's, and she's done another one since that I also took part in. And then she said to me, and she's married to a guy called Charlie Cornish, who is the chief executive of Manchester Airport Group, and she said, so she knows everybody at the airport. She said, "Would you go to the airport, to the fire station, and do awareness talks for all 4 of the fire station crew, for the different watches?" So I did 4 prostate cancer awareness talks for Manchester Airport firemen. And that started me basically doing patient advocacy work. Because then I contacted Prostate Cancer UK because I quite enjoyed doing it. Realised I could make a difference, save some lives, and that's really what started it. So it's all thanks to Margot and a flipping fashion show. So the impact of patient advocacy is substantial. Influencing the screening campaign. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what Tackle did as far as screening is concerned. First of all, prostate cancer research, we aligned ourselves with them because they are the most progressive charity as far as screening is concerned. More progressive than Prostate Cancer UK, because Prostate Cancer UK are very much tied in with the Transform trial, which I will talk about briefly. So we aligned ourselves with prostate cancer research. We encouraged all our groups and their members to write to their MPs, become campaign ambassadors, and also to make submissions to the National Screening Committee. And I made a very long submission to the National Screening Committee. But then prostate cancer research were putting together a very detailed response to talk about the modelling that the National Screening Committee had used and where it was flawed. And that submission was very detailed. It was about 200 and odd pages long. And Paul Davis, the current chair, and I were given it on a Tuesday and said that we need to read it by Friday and then decide whether we want to be co-signatories to it. So Paul and I went through it in great detail. We were very impressed with the amount of work they've done. and we wanted to align with it, and so Tackle, via Paul and I, became co-signatories to Prostate Cancer Research's 200 and odd page submission to the National Screening Committee. They employed a health company to basically review the output from the National Screening Committee and to work out where it was flawed. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the response is very robust. I'm not as optimistic as Peter about the fact that we'll get screening. I don't think we will get screening anytime soon. I think it's all hinging on the Transform trial. But that's, I think, fundamentally important. More men diagnosed earlier. So doing prostate cancer awareness talks as an advocate, you all do it. You all talk to your friends. That's advocacy. That saves men's lives. One of my accountancy clients phoned me and said, "Tony, thanks for saving my life." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I knew your story, so I asked my doctor for a PSA test." He was 47. And the doctor refused, but because he knew my story, he insisted. His PSA was 4.7. 6 weeks later, it was 5.2. That was a 10% increase in 6 weeks. He'd have been dead by the age of 55. That's the power of patient advocacy. Improved access to drugs. I'm being kept alive by abiraterone, which was developed here in the UK by the Institute of Cancer Research. I campaigned for fair access to that drug, and it's now been approved, but only last November, as a first-line treatment for men with metastatic prostate cancer. It's also now been approved as a drug for men with non-metastatic but high-risk prostate cancer. So patient advocacy involves things like campaigning for drug access, and so I've been involved in that. Influencing patient care. So I get to speak at some conferences, and I'm going to go through actually one of the presentation I did at ESMO in a second. And the idea is that I get to speak in front of an audience of urologists, an audience of oncologists, and basically get up on stage and say, "You're crap." Not quite in those words, because that would be very rude, but the message is you can do better, and I'm going to show you one of my presentations in a second. That's the power of patient advocacy. We can influence the healthcare professionals, and I think that's really important. Advocating for the value of exercise. I'm very passionate about the value of exercise for people living with cancer. Indeed. The evidence is now completely overwhelming that exercise is beneficial for people living with cancer, and particularly for men living with prostate cancer on permanent hormone therapy like I am. Even to this day, despite having been on treatment for 9 years, I still try and run 4 times a week. I do body conditioning classes and try to do as much exercise as I possibly can, because it helps stave off the side effects of long-term hormone therapy. So I'm a massive advocate for the value of exercise. Next week I'm chairing a prehabilitation conference. So, exercise is really important, and I try and spread the messages as far as I can. So I've helped with the development of prehabilitation. Prehabilitation is treatment before starting, is an exercise program before starting treatment or surgery for cancer. And in Greater Manchester, the Prehabilitation for Cancer program has actually shown incredible efficacy in reducing NHS costs, getting people back to work more quickly and improving lifestyles, but most importantly, changing them permanently. And then involvement in awareness campaigns. So we've been heavily involved in awareness campaigns. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about a campaign that just happened completely out of the blue. Manchester City Council Awareness Campaign. So I am on lots of social media, but I was on Twitter, now called X. And a guy contacted me out of the blue, a guy called Pat Carney, who is a councillor for Manchester City Council, and said, "Tony, we'd like to do an awareness campaign in Manchester City area, and we'd like you to be the face of it." And this is very flattering. And he approached me because of my other advocacy work. I was invited to go along to a full council meeting. There were about 100 councillors and about 30 people in the public gallery. and do a 10-minute presentation about why awareness was so important. And the message was, we haven't got screening, so awareness is all we're left with. And along to that, I got very good ovation, great feedback, very pleased with it. But I realised that actually a white middle-class man should not be the face of a campaign. Could be one of the faces, but not the face. And I realised that we really needed to get people from different communities involved. Prostate cancer adversely affects those from poorer socio-economic backgrounds more than it does from people of wealthier backgrounds. It affects the black community much, much worse. So I was very keen that we got involved with other people being the face of it and not just me. So I just happened to know my friend Maurice Blake, and I'm going to show some videos in a second. So Maurice and I were asked if we would record a couple of videos so they could use them on their social media. They're only short, they're only about a minute each, and I'll come to that in a second. We were very, very keen that we must reach the hard-to-reach communities. So we talked about, how do we do that? Where do the hard-to-reach communities go? And it's places like this, football matches, match day, in the bar, on the buses, you know, all the places where people go to from the poorer socio-economic backgrounds. We had to reach them. So the campaign has been built around that. I also wanted to involve Prostate Cancer UK because I made it very clear that this was not a screening campaign, this was an awareness campaign. A screening campaign then would have actually flown in the face of the evidence about screening. So I made it very clear that we had to do this properly. It had to be an awareness campaign, and Prostate Cancer UK were a great help. They helped us to get all the electronic advertising boardings in Manchester for a week showing prostate cancer stuff, which is fantastic. So PC UK were a great help. Also wanted to make sure we avoided putting pressure on GPs, because you can imagine a million men in Greater Manchester suddenly knock on the GP's door and say, can I have a PSA test? And you know what the reaction is going to be. So we were very keen that that didn't happen. So we started off with a very low-level campaign. But Greater Manchester Cancer Alliance are developing a counselling tool, and that counselling tool will be online. People will be able to do that, go through the counselling tool, which means that GPs do not have to do the counselling, because the counselling tool will do it. And when the man has gone through the counselling tool, they will then be able to click on a link and request a PSA test, automatically given to them. So no more GPs saying no, no more GP appointments being needed. So the counselling tool, we hope, will be rolled out nationally. That will be available, we think, in May, June. And when it is ready and available to go, we're going to go with a bigger campaign. So Manchester leading the way, because we always lead the way. And then, would you believe they called it Tony time? Slightly embarrassing. And we did some videos on electronic billboards. And so this link, and I think these slides are being distributed, so we're not going to show you the link, but basically this was the press release. So when you see the slides, you can see the press release that was sent out by Manchester City Council, and it was sort of Manchester City's own Tony Time campaign or something like that. Very embarrassing. And then these are the videos which Dan is now going to show you.
9 years now. It's incredible, isn't it? I was given 2 to 3 years to live 9 years ago. I'm like the really lucky ones. Probably like you, lost friends along the way. Lost a friend last year who'd only got diagnosed 3 years earlier. I've got another friend who's currently enjoying a holiday of a lifetime to New Zealand, but he was told before Christmas no other treatments available. And so he spent his last Christmas on this earth. And that's the harsh reality of prostate cancer, isn't it?
It certainly is, and you're an exception to the rule, and it's amazing to hear that you are 9 years, and obviously still fighting strong and still fighting for the cause, which is absolutely amazing. My journey has been a short journey, it's only been 3 years, but again, in that 3 years, it's, you know, to still be here to tell the story, and to still catch it early, and as I say, you can't wait for symptoms, and we can't emphasise enough, is not to wait for symptoms. Once you're over a certain age and you are in a high risk bracket, you know, you please must go and get checked out.
So black men over 45.
Black men over 45.
Men over 45 with a family history.
Family history of prostate cancer, ovarian or cervical cancer, or breast cancer, or the BRCA gene.
Yeah. and then all men over 50.
And then all the over 50.
And hopefully between you and I we'll save a few lives.
Well, hopefully so. Let's hopefully hope that in another 9 years,
Yeah.
we're still sat here and we're still talking about our survival rate, and hopefully that prostate cancer is reduced or a thing of the past.
Yeah. It's nice actually to be good at something for a change.
Certainly is.
So there is another one, so just it's only a short one.
Maurice, when you were diagnosed, did you have any symptoms before that? Maurice, when you were diagnosed, did you have any symptoms before that?
Unfortunately, Tommy, no, I didn't really. I didn't have any traditional symptoms. I had a little bit of blood every so often, but not the traditional symptoms that I'm associated with prostate cancer.
Yeah, I was the same. I had no symptoms whatsoever, and I was diagnosed incurable at the age of 60, and I had a tumour in every bone in my body from pelvis to skull. And just to say it was a life-changing experience would be a massive understatement, wouldn't it? And I mean, you've been cured, so that makes me feel wonderful for you, but actually there's lots of people out there diagnosed too late, and we need to do better, don't we?
Yeah, luckily enough, because my diagnosis was early, I was able to go under active surveillance for 12 months. So whereas my PSA readings were being monitored, and obviously during that period of time, my PSA readings started to rise again. So after the second biopsy, we then realised that my cancer had become more aggressive and it had grown. So then obviously we had to act, and then treatment was obviously, how can I say, speeded up. And I'm still here today to tell the story that early diagnosis is the key for survival.
So those were very powerful films used by Manchester City Council in all their social media campaigns for a week or so. It was really important to me that we had a black voice, a black face, not just a white working class, white middle class face. So this was really important to me. Clinical trials. I was asked if I would talk a little bit about clinical trials, so I'm going to do just that. People often say to me, how do we find out about clinical trials? And I'm sure you've all heard about Prostate Cancer Research's tool, the Info Pool. The Info Pool is a source, an amazing source of trusted information from prostate cancer research, but it also has a trials database, and that's the link to the trials database. So if you want to find information about trials, that's where you find it. I'm going to talk about the President trial, because this is a new trial, and I'm a patient lead co-collaborator, which means I'm responsible for all the PPIE work, which is patient and public involvement. The President trial is looking at whether surgery for oligometastatic prostate cancer is beneficial. So oligometastatic prostate cancer is metastatic cancer, but only in 4 or 5 places in the body, not all over the body. So it wouldn't work for me. And the idea is one arm will have standard care, the other arm will have standard care and the prostate removed. And we're trying to work out whether having the prostate removed prolongs life and improves outcomes. So it's funded by the NIHR, and this is just some idea about NHS spends on prostate cancer. The burden of late-stage cancer, at least 120,000 per patient. My care to keep me alive so far has cost £300,000. So you can go through the slides in more detail yourselves when you get them. This is the guy who is the head of the trial, Prasanna Suryakumaran, otherwise known as PS, because nobody can pronounce his name apart from me. What we need are better treatments for lethal disease rather than focusing on non-lethal disease. And this is what oligometastatic prostate cancer looks like. Tumours in 2 or 3 places spread out from the main one. This is, it's obviously more tumour burden, so it wouldn't work for that patient, but it would work for this patient. So it's an intermediate spread of cancer between local and widespread metastases. And these are just a few of the stats about it, about radiotherapy. So at the moment there is a radiotherapy trial where they basically irradiate the prostate to see if That actually helps with oligometastatic prostate cancer, but radiotherapy causes problems, and that's what this slide is trying to explain, the problems that it causes. And the hypothesis is that removing the prostate will render the systemic therapy like abiraterone and enzalutamide more effective and enhance quality of life for men with metastatic prostate cancer. There's a feasibility study being done called Trombone. It demonstrated that patients wanted a full trial. The men who went into that trial, lots of men have said to me, I've got metastatic prostate cancer, why didn't they take the prostate out? Well, the answer was, because it was never known to be beneficial. We're trying to work out with oligometastatic whether it is beneficial, and that's what this trial's about. And that's more detail about the trial. It's 749 men across 26 sites over 82 months. 30% of black African American representation, an initial pilot trial, and 2 years reviews of standard of care therapies. What that basically means is if standard of care changes over the first 2 years, they will review what standard of care is for the trial. And then other trials, what's coming? You probably will have heard of the Stampede trial. The Stampede trial has been the most successful prostate cancer trial of all time because it developed drugs like abiraterone, which is keeping me alive and keeping many other men alive. But Stampede 2 is now in operation. And what Stampede 2 is doing is adding lutetium-177 to standard of care, and the other arm is adding stereotactic radio ablation therapy and standard of care to try to see if those are beneficial for men with metastatic prostate cancer. So Stampede 2 trial is up and running at the moment. It's got 2 arms. Have a read about it, just Google it, you'll find lots of information. And then the Transform trial, which I think everybody probably knows about. The Transform trial is being run by Prostate Cancer UK. It's throw things about. It's funded by NIHR to the tune of 16 million, but Prostate Cancer UK is sticking the rest in, so 42 million over 10 to 15 years. It's the largest ever screening trial undertaken in the UK, or in the world for that matter. And what they're trying to do is establish what the best method of screening is. And I think this is why we will not see the National Screening Committee change their mind when their decision is reviewed. Because the Transform trial has said that they will produce some information inside 2 years' time. The first 2 years they will recruit 16,000 men into the trial. They'll then do an interim report, and the National Screening Committee will agree that they will act on it. The second phase of the trial is 300,000 men, so it's a really, really big trial. But also really good about it is they are developing a biobank of samples of prostate cancer so that people developing new diagnostic tests can actually test their test against the prostate cancer samples. Because if you're the manufacturer of the Stockholm 3 test, for example, you are not going to be able to do large-scale randomised controlled trials because you can't afford to do it because you've not got the money. But the biobank will give them access to all these samples that they can use with their test to prove its efficacy. So it's got many advantages. My slight concern about it is if in 2 years' time it doesn't produce evidence that supports screening, we wait 10 years for the next evidence to come. That 10 years equals 120,000 more deaths. We cannot let that happen. So we will be campaigning to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so watch this space. Question for you about screening. Does anybody regret the PSA test that led to their diagnosis? No. That's what the problem is, isn't it? They don't ask us, they don't ask the men who are living with prostate cancer, do you regret having your PSA test? No, none of us regret having the PSA test. We might regret the side effects of the treatment we've had, but the harsh reality is that they don't listen to us. And for me, that is a big issue. They need to listen to men The National Screening Committee didn't have a single man with lived experience of prostate cancer on the panel. That tells you a story, doesn't it? This is a very complicated slide. I'm not going to go through all of it because I don't have time. But when you get the slides, this is about the National Screening Committee's flawed modelling. So the National Screening Committee, they do not do their own modelling. They employed an entity called SCAR, which is I think it's a link to the university in Sheffield, and they do modelling. So they modelled based on assumptions. All models have to have assumptions, but it's one of those, isn't it? Rubbish in, rubbish out. So Prostate Cancer Research employed their own modelling company to do another look at it, to review the output from the National Screening Committee. And these are, I'm going to go a few of them. So the first one, the modelling stopped at 15 years, but the full benefits from screening don't arrive until 20. It models a pathway that was abandoned a decade ago. This is the pathway for diagnosis because MRI wasn't in it. One that really got me is the one at the bottom, because this is where I am. It based the cost versus benefit calculation on men only being treated for 3 years for advanced prostate cancer. Now, I've been treated for 9 years. The average is 7 years. How can you base your model, the cost versus advantage argument, on 3 years when the average is actually 7 years? So it's completely flawed. And all the data in there is very relevant. And you can have a look at that when you get the slides. And another question for you, which is worse? Late diagnosis or harm from overtreatment? Because I know what I think. I think the harm from late diagnosis is much worse than the harm from overtreatment. The harm from late diagnosis basically means that your life is probably going to be taken away by prostate cancer unless something else gets you first. Well, that's the harsh reality. And yet we are told repeatedly that there is lots of harm from overtreatment, therefore we shouldn't be doing any screening. I'm sorry, but I just find it flummoxes me. It really annoys me. I get very angry about it. And the National Prostate Cancer Audit is something else I just want to briefly talk about. The National Prostate Cancer Audit is done every year. It produces some outcomes, and there's some really interesting bits in it. Again, I'm not going to go through them all, but this top one, this is men with stage 4 cancer. 34% of men under the age of 75 didn't receive standard of care within 12 months. They're being harmed. 12% of men are diagnosed de novo stage 4, that's stage 4 at diagnosis, but with massive regional variances. 20% in the Midlands, 20% in the Northwest, 35% in Scotland of men are diagnosed metastatic at diagnosis. This one, only 7% of men with low-grade indolent cancers had radical treatment. So the argument that men are being harmed by being overtreated, only 7%. Sorry, but that's not harm, is it? That's worrying though. The range is 2 to 40. So the best hospitals, only 2% of men with low-grade cancers were having radical treatment, but the worst, 40%. And those hospitals are now being looked at by the National Prostate Cancer Audit to work out what's going wrong. So I asked the question at the bottom, who is being harmed? I was also asked to talk about what's going on in Europe. This is an incredibly busy slide. And again, I won't go through it all, but I'll pick out just one or two things. The European randomised study of prostate cancer was a 23-year study, and it showed that prostate cancer mortality was 13% lower in the screening group. That's evidence, isn't it? But we need more evidence, apparently. And the improved harm to benefit ratio, benefits of screening becoming more pronounced with long-term follow-up and improved, obviously, diagnostics. So that's basically what's happened in Europe. 23-year study, but it's been basically pretty much ignored. The Europa Euromo Quality of Life study, I brought this paper with me, which I will leave, and but it's available at that website, and you can actually have a read of it. Italy, national progress towards organised prostate and lung cancer screening. Croatia, progress towards organised prostate cancer screening. Cyprus, preparation for screening. Croatia have announced the screening programme. So things are happening in Europe, but not in the UK. Praise You project, due to be completed in 2026. That could pave the way for national screening programmes across Europe. You're getting this, Europe is doing all right, and Brexit left us out of it. It's funded by the European Union, and it's developing a protocol to work out how effective prostate cancer screening might be in the real world. There's 4 work streams, and you can see the link there, which you can look at in your own time. Organised screening programmes in Sweden, the Czech Republic. EAU announced the EAU is the European Association of Urologists at their conference in 2026 recently. Prostate cancer screening is as good as breast cancer screening. So there's lots of stuff going on, and I think this is really important. I think the other good one is the Gothenburg one. Confirmed that screening significantly reduces mortality, with the benefit increasing over time. Reducing overdiagnosis by focusing on clinically significant cancer. Modern screening aims to avoid treating slow-growing tumours that would never have caused symptoms. So that's what's happening in Europe. I was asked to talk about self-advocacy. I get so annoyed at constantly having to advocate for my own care. It's frustrating that we have to, but it creates healthcare inequalities, because those people who are not health literate or not generally literate, the average reading age in Greater Manchester is 8, would you believe? So health literacy and general literacy leads to healthcare inequalities, because people have got to self-advocate. We shouldn't have to. Examples, I constantly have to nag my GP about my Prostate injection, and they keep cancelling them at short notice because no one understands how important they are. NHS admin, my admin has been absolutely woeful at virtually every stage. It lets the NHS down so much. And if I'm not on the telephone to my oncologist secretary saying, can you sort this out, it doesn't get sorted out. Access to complementary therapies. I did in fact ask if there was anything to support me with my fatigue. I had to self-advocate for it, so it meant I had to ask. But yes, there's loads. So I actually got acupuncture, which was, for me, was very, very well worthwhile. I was the biggest sceptic imaginable, but it actually worked wonders. Access to support for penile health. There are regions of the country where men are not allowed to have a vacuum pump prescribed. That's disgraceful. I'm sorry, that's disgraceful. The penis is a muscle, and if it's not exercised, it will atrophy. So vacuum pumps are really important. Access to psychosexual therapy. This is a major bugbear for me. If you're on long-term hormone therapy, you lose libido, you lose erectile function completely. I was 60 years of age, my wife was 58. Imagine being in that situation where you've got no sex life because of prostate cancer. And then there's no support. I had private medical insurance when I was diagnosed, which meant if I asked, we've got this wonderful psychosexual therapist, and yes, you can see her. And we had 4 sessions with a psychosexual therapist, and she was amazing. It taught us a lot about intimacy, sexuality that didn't involve penetrative sex, different ways of pleasuring each other, the fact that you could actually reach orgasm without an erection, and all these things came from having a psychosexual therapist available to us. That is just not accessible to men in the UK. There are only 600 psychosexual therapists, and you cannot get one unless you pay for it, and that's a disgrace. So we have to constantly self-advocate, and I am a great believer in true, personalised, holistic care. I'm going to very quickly run through a presentation that I did at ESMO. I'm not going to go through it in detail because of time, but you can see the slides later when they're distributed. ESMO is the European Society of Medical Oncologists. I was on a symposium with 3 of the world's leading oncologists, And I got up on stage and said, "You're not very good at what you do." The audience was oncologists. And this is the presentation. So I talked about my journey. I talked about the fact that it should be a true partnership between a healthcare professional and a patient. I looked at personalised holistic care, looked at what we can do better between us and the healthcare professionals, and talked about changing holistic needs, because I'm very passionate about making sure our changing holistic needs are looked after, because my needs are very different now than they were 9 years ago. So I talked about my journey from ultramarathon to in the chemo ward. This was my journey. This was just to make sure that the audience of oncologists was educated about where I was at. Talked about all these different impacts on day-to-day life, the impact on my identity as a man, my masculinity, the impact on my family, the impact on my finances, and the impact on sexuality. And it's really important that this message gets across to these oncologists, because they are very good at treating the cancer but not very good at doing this stuff. And that's why I do these talks for healthcare professionals. Talked about what true partnership look like, talked about the importance of shared decision making, the fact that we have to trust our healthcare professionals, they need to be open and honest with us, they need to tell us about all the treatment options. How many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, no one told me about that"? You know, how many people who've had prostatectomies didn't need them, could have had focal therapy? Well, I'm sorry, they need to tell you about all treatment options, not just what's available at their centre. They need to talk about all holistic and changing holistic needs and real personalised care. And then I went through some definitions of personalised care, and I highlighted some of the key words, and I think there's 3 or 4 of these. So I talked about empowerment, I talked about choice, I talked about control, shifting power, making sure the patients have a voice. And then all those key words we put into a chart to, give the replace icons. This was one that was developed, it was developed subsequently. But all those items were items that we discussed in this symposium. And so what could clinicians do better? True personalised holistic care needs to cover changing needs. They should do holistic needs assessments within 9 to 12 months of diagnosis. I bet there's not many people in this room who've had a holistic needs assessment. I haven't. Revisit those holistic needs when at least once a year or when the pathway changes. Make sure patients can access all their records. I can't actually access my records at the cancer hospital. Primary and secondary care need to use systems that speak to each other. My doctor can't see my records at the Christie. It's remarkable. A single point of contact to improve communications, digitalisation of records, and a shift in power to patients. Let us have more control, but support that control. Don't shy away from difficult conversations. Healthcare professionals are not very well trained about talking about things like sexuality. They shy away from it because they've not had the training. Then we need to do better. They need to have those difficult conversations. Signpost without being asked. Greater awareness of mental and sexual health impact. Suicide rates in men with stage 4 are higher than the national average for suicide in men. Psychosexual health, not just sexual health. But don't overprotect patients. Patients have remarkable resilience and can still do remarkable things. And then I talked about all the pathway, again forgive the icons, they got changed. Disease progression, treatment failure, clinical trials, moving on to end-of-life care. Holistic needs change along that timeline. We talked about what they need to do, acknowledge, adapt, and advocate for us. Advocate for your patients so they don't have to self-advocate. And then I always finish with this slide. Remember to treat the person, not just the cancer. That's a really, really important message to healthcare professionals. Healthcare inequalities, I've talked about abiraterone not being available. Lutetium-177 is still not available on the NHS, it's only available in the Stampede trial. Socio-economic deprivation leads to massive healthcare inequalities. Poorer people from poorer backgrounds fare less well. National prostate cancer and standard of care for stage 4, it's obvious that not everybody is getting the best possible care for stage 4 prostate cancer. And ethnicity has bad outcomes. And very near the end, you'll be glad to hear. I wanted to just talk about walking the walk. I talk about exercise. I was diagnosed in 2017, went straight onto hormone treatment, been on it ever since, and it absolutely annihilated me, and still does. But since then, I ran the London Marathon in 2018. In 2019, I set out to run 970 miles in a year. I wanted to run a mile for every man that died every month of prostate cancer. By the end of the year, that had risen to 1,000, and I'd run out of energy, so a friend did a 30-mile run for me. I completed the Race to the Castle 100-kilometre ultramarathon over 2 days. I ran at least 5 kilometres every single day for 365 days in 2022, and I've raised nearly £100,000 by doing stupid, madcap things. But it isn't about me. It isn't about how great I am. It's about the fact that actually cancer patients are incredibly resilient. We can do so much more. You may have heard of Kevin Webber, who is also stage 4, 11 years into his diagnosis. He's just completed his 5th Marathon des Sables, which is a 6-day race across the Sahara, including 1 day of 100 kilometres climbing huge sand dunes. So we are resilient, we can do amazing things, keep doing amazing things. This is me walking the walk. This is Bamborough Castle at the end of the 100-kilometre ultramarathon. This is my friend Kirsty, who used to run the prehabilitation programme in Manchester. We ran together for a bit, but she's young and fit and I'm old and fat. And so she didn't run with me for the rest of it. She got me a beer in at the end. And then this is at the end of my 365-day challenge. About 70 or 80 of my friends turned up to support me. And also we had the TV cameras there who covered it that evening on the television. So that was amazing. And this is all my friends and family who turned up to support me and do the 5K with me. And that's it. Thank you. I am very happy to take any questions.
Where does all your medication, you said you've got metastatic bone problems, so how do your bones stand up to all this pounding that you do?
Well, I think that's a good question. One of the things I've not mentioned in the presentation is about bone health. Everybody who is on long-term hormone therapy should be doing something about their bone health. And I initially was just doing exercise, so exercise is quite important. But about 4 years into my treatment, my oncologist said it's now felt to be the right thing to do something proactive about bone health. And I'd like to put you onto bisphosphonates. So bisphosphonates are basically, they strengthen the bone. They can actually also help reduce pain if you're suffering bone pain. I tried initially alendronic acid, which is in a pill form, and I couldn't tolerate it. You have to take it stood up, because otherwise you can burn a hole in your windpipe, which is not very pleasant. But it gave me acid reflux, so that meant I then qualified for zoledronic acid, which is done by infusion every 12 weeks at the Christie. So I've been on that now for 4.5 years, and that does help to maintain bone strength. So if you're not on alendronic acid or zoledronic acid and you're on long-term hormone therapy, you should be talking to your medical team about it. But lots of men take calcium tablets because that's really important. And obviously a good balanced diet. So.
Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned the biobank. Is as well as sort of thing that could be used for training AI on?
Well, that's a good question. I've not thought about it. I guess it could do. I mean, I guess it could be in the analysis of the samples, I'm sure they'll be using AI, definitely.
Yeah, sounds like an opportunity.
It does sound like an opportunity, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. What is the sort of national protocol on whether someone sees a surgeon or an oncologist quickly? Because before, I had a useful surgeon who got things completely wrong, and then a really good oncologist who got things really right. I think it's luck who you see.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially everybody probably sees a urologist, and I know that the urologist I saw wanted to control my care, but then I was private, so I do wonder whether the money was a motivation. But I think once you are diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer, it should be an oncologist and not a urologist. But I do think some urologists try to do more than they should do. And it was interesting when I spoke at the European Association of Urologists conference in Paris, and obviously the audience was urologists and urological nurses, and the panel that I was on were basically talking about what best possible care for metastatic prostate cancer is. And we started the symposium by asking the question, what do you think would be the best care in these circumstances? And it was basically me when I was first diagnosed. And remarkably, a significant percentage of them said hormone therapy only. Standard of care for metastatic prostate cancer should be hormone therapy plus androgen receptor pathway inhibitor like abiraterone and enzalutamide and chemotherapy. So triplet therapy for men who can tolerate it. But the urologists were actually treating men for metastatic prostate cancer and giving them substandard care. We asked the same question at ESMO to the oncologists, and 5% of them would only give hormone therapy as well. So it's quite clear that there's a bit of education needed, and that's what the symposium was all about. It was educating urologists and oncologists about what standard of care actually does look like. And all three of the oncologists that were on the stage with me in their presentations said loud and clear, doublet therapy as a minimum, triplet therapy the norm. And so the message is actually getting out there to the medical community, but certainly urologists initially, and then oncologists if it's metastatic.
Tony, in what you've just said, do you think age is a figure? And the younger the person is, the better treatment they would get. I mean, so I'm in now the second time of having prostate cancer, and to be honest, I'm getting virtually nothing, just the 12 weeks, and that's it. At 88, and I'm thinking, is it worth it?
Yeah, agreed. And I think the slide about the National Prostate Cancer Audit showed that men over 75, a very small proportion, were actually getting intensified treatment, like the triplets I mentioned. And the reason for that is, if you're 88, why the hell put you through chemo? That's probably going to prolong your life by 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, and so age is definitely important, but so many men below the age of 75 weren't getting standard care. That's not good enough. But I do think if you're older, if you've got comorbidities, if you're infirm, then certainly putting people through that level of treatment is just, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. There was a lot in that presentation, but I was asked to cover a lot. The slides are going to be made available, I believe. The slides from the ESMO presentation, they need to be kept within the group rather than outside the group. But if anybody has any questions they want to email to me, you have my email address, so please feel free to email me. I'm very happy to deal with any questions that way. There was a lot in there, but I'll try to skip through it, so thank you.